Oh, thanks, Catherine. In 2016, we moved our base of operations to Snow Hill. And since then, we've strengthened our work on a number of fronts. This permanent home has really given us greater visibility in the community. It's given us a lot more options for educational programming, except over the last couple of years, we've struggled a bit, as I think a lot of folks have, because we haven't been able to see everyone in person as much. So we're hoping that this year we can do some more programming. But our property here also serves as a gateway to our region's natural assets and the lands that we protect. Being on the Pocomoke River and our proximity to the Pocomoke State Forest, it really is a great gateway there. Next slide. So this, we're going to talk about, really what we do. Jared's going to talk about the conservation easements. Frank's going to talk about our stewardship program. As I mentioned, Victoria's got the invasive species. And Frank's also going to talk about our soil health. That's for not just larger landscape parcels, but soil health for everyone, and other ways to get involved. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jared and look forward to hearing what everyone has to say today. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. Appreciate everybody for joining us this morning. I'm going to just give you a quick background on myself. I came to land protection from a sort of circuitous route. I have done a lot of biological field work, ecological population studies and stuff, mostly with birds over the course of my professional history. In school, I have a bachelor's in anthropology and a master's in environmental studies. And as Kate said, I've worked in this field for about 15 years. I've been here at the Lower Shore Land Trust for the last 4+. Prior to that, I was at the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy, which serves as a land trust for the mid and upper Eastern Shore. And I was there for about 11 years. So today, I'm going to talk sort of the front work that gets done to have properties to monitor. So I'm going to talk about where we work, what's in our easement portfolio, and then what a conservation easement is, what's in it, and the types of conservation easements, because without a background and understanding at least a little bit about what the document is that protects the properties, it's a little harder to know how we go about stewarding them. So next slide. So this is the map of our service area. We cover the lower 3 counties of the Eastern Shore. And we don't work yet in Delaware or Virginia, but we do work with a lot of partners across the Delmarva, including in both of those states. So we're sort of an important area that kind of connects the peninsula between all 3 states. And as you can see, we have Worcester County, we have our most easements and the most acreage. Wicomico, we have a bit fewer, and then Somerset, a little less as well. But totally we have 136 easements that cover almost 24,000 acres. So we have a pretty good bit of work to do every year to get out to each one of those properties. And we'll show you as we go along how we manage that. Next slide, please. To break that portfolio down a little bit, as I said, we have 136 easements. When you split that acreage up, we have a little over 12,000 of it is forested lands. And as you know from traveling around the lower Eastern Shore, it's definitely heavily forested with lots of loblolly pine plantations, as well as a lot of mixed natural forest and a lot of bottomland forest in places like the Pocomoke River Basin, etc. We also do have a fair amount of cropland under easement, but as you can see, it's our lowest sort of land use that we have, and we have a lot of wildlife and marsh habitat. Next slide, please. So what's a conservation easement? In general, it's a legal agreement between two people that are two groups, what we call the grantor and the grantee. And in essence, it's a document that limits the uses of the land, and it does that perpetually. They're not any term easements in Maryland anymore. So all of these restrictions last forever, and they go from landowner to landowner to landowner right through with the chain of title. Next slide, please. So as I said, there's a grantor, and that's the landowner, the person that owns the land and grants the easement in one way or another to the grantee organizations, or often, as we work in partnership with a lot of different groups, there are multiple grantees on that easement. Oftentimes we work with state entities or federal entities, and they'll be on that easement as well, often because they've provided funds or some type of expertise to the project. Next slide, please. As I said, all easements in Maryland are perpetual. They're forever. They run with the title of the land, and they can't be lifted. You can't buy them back. Once they're done, and they permanently protect that piece of property. They aren't considered a fee transfer. When you buy your house, you buy it in fee. That means you own it and you own all of the rights associated with it. In this case, the grantor continues to own it and operate it and manage it, and they can sell it and they can pass it on to their heirs. It's just something to limit the uses of the property. Next slide, please. And we limit those uses to protect certain attributes of the property that either the program or the IRS for a donated easement have deemed for the public good, if you will. So some of those examples of those reasons why we protect properties is because we're in a rural area and we want to protect the scenic view sheds and scenic areas along our roads and waterways to have it continue to look and feel rural. We also protect wildlife habitat, water quality through different practices and buffer requirements. We can also preserve historical and cultural resources, and we protect productive agricultural and forest land to have continuing resource-based economies in our service area. And we do protect shorelines and riparian habitat, especially along our rivers and streams. Next slide, please. So to protect those attributes that we've identified in each of these properties, that's why we limit the use of the property. So you don't want a whole lot of industrial or commercial activities on those properties because it's going to interfere with the protection and the clean operation of those attributes. In some rare cases, we might, if we have a fully forested tract, we don't want the forest converted to another use, we might actually limit agriculture on the property. In some high quality or high habitat forests, we might limit the timber harvest a little bit so that it's more selective logging instead of clear cuts, so that that habitat always exists. In almost every one of our easements, we require buffers around water bodies so that the activities on the landscape are less affecting of the water quality. And in the same way that heavy industrial or commercial activities can affect those attributes of the property, so does the subdivision of that piece of property and the number of residences that go on it. So all easements limit the amount of subdivision and homes that can be on it. There's basically two types of easements. Regulatory easements are those that, say for instance, a landowner has done something wrong. They might be required to have an easement held by an organization like ours to mitigate for whatever they did wrong. Or it could be because a developer has an offset because they've done a development and they're required to do some wetland or forest mitigation somewhere else. So we will hold that easement. Most of the easements we work with are voluntary, and they're either donated to us or sold, or a combination of the two, where somebody will sell that easement at a bargain and they might be able to get a tax break as well as some cash out of the deal. Next slide. And this is my last slide. As I said, we work with a lot of different partners, and with donated easements, we either hold them by ourselves, or more than likely we hold them with the Maryland Environmental Trust, which is a statewide land trust that works with all of us local land trusts on these donated easement projects. But we also work with a whole lot of different purchase programs, as you can see on the screen, and this is just a subset of them. We work with a lot more programs than this that fund our work or provide certain expertise or backing for the projects that we do. And so each one of these programs may have different requirements that have to be built into the easement. So as we work with our easements and we work to monitor those easements, we have to know which program helped us do it and which requirements we're looking at when we go out on the ground to see how we've protected that property. So I'm going to go, I think that's my last slide, Frank, is that correct? There we go. So I'm going to hand it over now to Frank. Once we get the easements done, then the real part of the organization really starts, and how we protect those properties in perpetuity, and that's all through the stewardship program.
Oh yeah, can you hear me? All right, so yeah, I'm Frank Jeter. I am Lower Shore Land Trust Stewardship Coordinator, and you will be working with me on monitoring these properties. I'll give you a brief introduction to myself. I sent in an email yesterday. I had a little introduction, but I graduated from Eastern University. Actually, there's someone from Eastern on here today for the bachelor's in environmental science. And yeah, and I was an intern with Lower Shore Land Trust last year for Chesapeake Conservation Corps. And I came on full time this past August. I started volunteering with LSLT in 2018, and I was actually in the stewardship training 2019 in person. So I kind of know what you guys are going through here. So our goals for this section of the presentation, we want to know what stewardship is, about landowner relations, how to prepare for ground monitoring, and the basic procedure for ground monitoring. And we'll go through this gradually through this presentation. So stewardship. Stewardship deals with all aspects of land trust management of a conservation easement after its acquisition. So after Jared does his part, then like Jared said a few seconds ago, it gradually comes down to me, and we'll just start going through the process of keeping up with these properties. We need to keep landowner relations. We have to do processing of landowner requests and notices, requests for amendments, record keeping, managing stewardship funds, and enforcement and defense. Hopefully we don't have to do as much enforcement and defense, but it depends on what happens and what we find. So one of the major things of this program is monitoring the easements. So LSLT and Land Trust Alliance requires an annual visit for each property. We could do ground monitoring, we could do a remote monitoring, and we can do windshield monitoring. On the ground monitoring we'll be driving out there, and we'll be walking around the property, looking around the edges. We might be walking through a little bit of water, depends what we find. Remote monitoring we'll go through in later half of this presentation, and we're looking at either an airplane or a satellite image, and we're trying to see what's going on the property. That is most useful for marsh properties and swamps. And windshield is like a drive-by monitoring. So if it's like a bean field or something going on and it's full of beans, we can do windshield monitoring. Landowner relations. Landowner relations is one of the essential parts of easement monitoring. We need LSLT continues to work on our relationships with our easement landowners. Kate, did you want to say something? I don't know if she's still on here.
Yeah, I can say something here. Thanks, Frank. The fellow that you see in the center slide is a landowner we worked with. He did an easement early in the 90s, one of our early easements out in Somerset County. He donated an easement to us, Jim Myers. He was so proud of his property. It was almost like a party every time we went out to visit him. He would take us around in his golf carts and show us all the little projects he did. He had a historic cemetery on the property. He did a lot of habitat management for wildlife. So these are the types of landowners that really make the work we do so much fun. On the right-hand side, we worked with another gentleman, Dave Harvey, who owns property in the coastal bays and has been managing that for quail habitat. Some of you may have been watching some of the other presentations we've done or seen our newsletters where we highlighted the work that he's done. Again, these are the types of properties that we visit and the types of landowners that we engage with. Thanks, Frank.
Yep. Like I said before, landowners are the essential part of doing these properties. So for first time going out, we'll give a new landowner a letter and a little fact sheet by LSLT, and we'll do a follow-up visit. And then we'll do then we are required to do annual monitorings, and we'll also do mailings and notifications and little courtesy calls before we come out. We'll also do newsletters and workshops to our landowners. Successor landowners. This is a major concern about the easement monitorings and easements in general. So a growing body of research on conservation easement violations shows a majority of violations are committed not by the original easement grantors. And just in my last 6 months, we've actually seen a couple of these of new landowners and have a couple of violations going on. So this is one thing we have to look out for. And we have to communicate with our landowners and make sure this doesn't happen, such as giving them a phone call to explain the document and the easement to them, or sending them a letter. Strategic stewardship includes activities and outreach that enhances and restores conservation values of the easement and properties, and also develops landowner partnerships. So this could include best management practices installation, wetland installation. We had example a couple years ago with the woodland bioreactor installation, and also our landowner education programs, such as the landowner workshop that's coming up in this March. So as we go out to the monitoring sites, this is what you need to be prepared for. Bug spray. We all know that Eastern Shore bugs are a little bit crazy. So yeah, big bug spray is a big thing. Make sure you have some sunscreen. Appropriate clothing is a must. We all have little stories about appropriate clothing, such as make sure you have rubber boots or waterproof boots. I've actually got stuck myself with that. Have a hat or a rain jacket prepared. Somehow we always come out when it's drizzly or misty. I don't know how that happens, but it happens. Make sure I have closed-toed shoes and long pants. If it's a little chilly out, make sure you have warm clothes. So when we're going out to these properties, there's a few things we have to look for. One is structures or new construction. So buffers is also a big one. Some of the properties require buffers. and some of them don't, and the ones that do sometimes have different minimums and minimum distances. So a majority are 100 foot, and some of them are 25 or 50 foot, and some of them are like 15 here and 50 here. So you just gotta keep an eye on that. We'll go through that on the ground training. Forest stewardship plans and timber harvesting. On your right side of the pictures is example what timber harvesting looks like. We have knowledge from our board members about timber harvesting, and we can help direct you into what to look for there, and what to look for if we see a clear cutting and if it's okay or not. A lot of our properties allow timber harvesting, but we have to look at the forest stewardship plan. We also look for erosion, especially around ditch banks. Invasive species, Victoria's going to go on that a little bit later. And soil health, I'll go on that a little bit later as well. All right, so basic ground monitoring procedure. So LSLT requires a minimum of 2 people on the ground at all times. This is for safety reasons. We will give you a orange vest to wear out while we're property monitoring, along with little car signs on your vehicle. On your left side is an image of a point map, and we'll go through this on the ground monitoring as well, but basically we'll make a little point and show exactly where the image is taken and the direction. Hopefully with our new technology program we're working on, we will start going towards more technological based and the old school paper way. We also need to put keep track of time, date, and who is monitoring that day. We have a minimum of 6 photos need to be taken down on the ground, and we need to keep in contact with the landowner. If we can, talk to the landowner, see what he is doing on his property, if he's seeing any animals, if he's looking for deer, is he making food plots, that type of thing. And go out there, have a little fun, watch the birds, watch the deer swim, whatever you want to see. And we'll clock out on the point map. So this is an example of what the monitoring reports look like. There is the first page is more like a, you don't see the first page, but it is like a demographic of the property. So have the easement, the parcel number, our number, our partners' numbers, that type of thing. We don't have to worry about that right now. And I will go through this monitoring report with you when we get out in the field. And it's very straightforward, and I'm working on converting this to digital as well. So what happens after a ground visit? So we take the images and we download them on a PC or a tablet, and we write out the monitoring reports and send out letters to landowners and follow up the landowner as needed. You guys probably won't need to do that to begin with. You might not need to do that at all, but more volunteers helping out would be great. But this is more like what stuff I would be doing in the office. So what to expect when you're out monitoring? Walking, hiking long distances, that is a given. If you've ever been out monitoring with us, you know we're going to be walking a little bit. Be prepared for some rough terrain. These fields are not pavement. They can be rough. There's potholes here and there. Sometimes there'll be a ditch or two. So, and sometimes you're going to find some waterlogged ground. So wear some boots. And you're going to see some beautiful landscapes, especially around the crystal marshes and the beautiful interiors of forests. You're going to see some wildlife. One of the properties last year, I saw a ton of prairie warblers, which were really cool. And we're going to see meet some friendly, loving property owners out there and people who really love working on the land. So I can give you some brief questions, or we can wait till questions at the end if you want.
Does anyone have any thoughts or concerns, Jared? It looks like you have a question.
Actually, I was just giving him a hand, but I do want to say one thing about monitoring. We think of the monitoring visit is a great time to get out, and especially if the landowner's there, and to them about what they want to do and what the plans are for the property, how they're managing it, do they need any other resources. But we're really there for just to look at the property, to take the photos, to see what's going on. We don't do any evaluation of it while we're out there. That's sort of a process for when we get back to the office and we've gathered all the information. So we're just out there to have a good time, to see what's going on, and to document what we're seeing. And then we go back and like Frank says, then we kind of look things over and compare it to what it used to look like, and get an idea of how we're going to, if we need to follow up at all or not. And so it's just a great time to get out and have some fun and see great properties and to get a couple cool photographs. Thanks,
Jared. Yeah, then Lori has a question about long distances, and I know I can answer that too. It depends on the property, Lori, and we know that ahead of time. We have some volunteers that really don't do long distances. We have some properties that are not huge, so that you can look at them with kind of a nice gentle walk and not be too strenuous. But then, if there are more strenuous and longer distances to get out on, we would let you know. So that's part of kind of a survey that we would send out later. The other thing is, a few years ago, we had some volunteers that really liked to kayak. And some of our properties are best seen by the water. So that could be a way that you help us out as well.
I had a question real quick, and I might have missed this in the presentation. How frequent are these properties visited, or does it vary depending on the scope of the project or the size of the property?
Usually once a year, either by ground or aerial.
Okay.
Yeah, some of the programs we work with only require monitoring for, say, every 3 years.
Yeah.
Organizationally, we're accredited land trust through the Land Trust Alliance, and so we have kind of a higher bar than what some of the programs require. So
Sure.
we do, and we are required to monitor our easements annually. Each one
In annual
a year.
That's cool.
I had a follow-up question to both of those questions. The first one, when you say longer walks, I just want to have an idea, like 5 miles, a mile, like what is a longer walk? And then the other is, how many visits does the Lower Shore Land Trust do per week?
So some of the properties are like 8 acres and takes maybe 20 minutes to monitor, and some of them are over 1,000 acres. So you got a little bit of walking there. If you don't feel comfortable walking, contact me and we can schedule you on a day that we're not going to go out to big, large properties. And I'll work with you on that one.
Frank, can I just interject there for a second too? Some of our larger properties, Catherine, we might drive to a central location and do a loop, take a look at what those areas are, take a few pictures, and then drive to another portion of the property. So there are ways. I mean, generally, we're not out there walking 5 miles. However, there have been times when volunteers really want to get out and stretch their legs and walk around a property. And on a specific property, it's doable to do even more than 5 acres or 5 miles.
Yeah, and I'll chime in a little bit too. It's I would say, from my experience, and Mary Ann would be much better at answering this because she's done this portfolio a lot more than I have. But I would say generally, each property, you're probably walking less than 2 miles on each property. And then usually you're only doing, say, 3 or 4 properties at most in half of the day. So And usually that would be a mix of smaller properties and medium or bigger. Like if you do one big property, like we have one 800-acre easement and one that's over 1,000, you know, that might be an entire morning just on that property. But as Kate says, you're probably hopping from one location to another in the car. You're not covering the whole thing walking. So I would think that on the average day, you're probably walking between 2 and 4 miles with some breaks in between to get from property to property. And of course, you can always bring your own car and we can switch out. So if you're not comfortable walking that much in a morning or an afternoon, then you can, you know, you can do 1 or 2 properties and then and bug out, as long as we have at least 2 people with us the whole time. So.
Billy had a follow-up question too, is, you know, when I think it was, how frequently do we go out? And there are certain times of the year that are much better to monitor than other times.
Yeah.
And some of that, you know, Frank can address because of hunting, et cetera.
So looks like it's probably gonna be between mid-February to early April for the spring. And then we're gonna probably do another push in late October, early November, if needed. We're trying to stay away from hunting season and bugs.
And you'll be doing more of the remote monitoring during the
Yeah.
summer.
Yes.
And Kathleen had a question about who goes out and does Frank always go out? And we have in the past had some very experienced monitors that have been out on tons of properties, and they will be lead monitors. But of course, you want to train people up a good bit to get to that point where they can go out with other volunteers and lead the monitoring visits. Some have done reports for us and submitted the reports complete for us. Depends on what you're comfortable with and how much you've done it and how experienced you are to get to that point.
And then Mark also says, you know, do we go out in pairs? And our guidance requires that we go out in pairs, at least one other person to go out with you for safety reasons.
Yeah, because of the uneven terrain, and you know, all of us have ended up in a ditch or two, not like hopping it, but missing it. And you know, sometimes you get stuck to your knee in mud, and it helps to have somebody else there. And especially if something bad were to happen, where you to roll an ankle on a branch or something like that, it's just really good practice to have 2 people out there. And even myself, who likes to be out in the woods by myself a lot, I really appreciate going out on these visits with somebody else, just to know that we're all okay. Oh, the scheduling, Frank will schedule. That's a good question. Sorry about that. Frank will let whoever is interested in doing monitoring, and he'll send out an email saying, I'm going to be working these counties on these days, who's interested in going out with me, and whoever gets back to him. And it doesn't have to just be one other person. It could be 2 or 3 other people. It's, you know, more eyes is better, as long as we don't have, you know, a whole army going out. So you'll get the ability to choose from which days he's going to go out. And that'll be a mix of weekdays as well as some Saturdays.
Yeah, I'll send out an email probably early next week for our first group. I'll have this dates at the end of this presentation for until March. Any other questions?
Oh, I think you got muted there, Frank, but Christy sent a message. I might be able to get a couple of friends interested. Can I bring them along? Somebody want to speak to that real quick?
They really need to go through the training, or if you have somebody, Christy, that wants to go with you, when you're going out on one of the earlier ground monitoring visits, I would encourage you to invite them so that Frank can have some one-on-one with, or, you know, 3-on-1, whatever, so that they can have some training alongside of you.
But yes, more people are welcome. We'll take anybody, because we love volunteers. They're very important for what we do.
Okay.
And I will say that early on, having another person with me was especially helpful because I would always forget my bug spray or something absolutely crucial. So it's nice to always have a buddy system. But hey, everybody, my name is Victoria Spice. Like Kate said, I'm the invasive species coordinator, and I'm going to be talking to y'all about invasive species. So I've been on and off at the Land Trust for almost 10 years, believe it or not. I was just doing the math last night. I was fresh out of college, and I started as a volunteer, an intern, moved up to stewardship and outreach coordinator. Then I became a contractual employee to manage some of our pollinator activities and events. And now I'm managing the invasive species program. I just clearly can't get enough. So I'm excited to be here with y'all. So this morning, we're just going to quickly cover, what is the problem? Why do we care about invasive species? How do we define them versus the noxious weeds? What are the top 10 to be concerned about? How do we ID them? And what can you as homeowners, property owners, landowners, what can you do to prevent the spread? So next slide, please, Frank. So what is the problem? Most people have no idea what's happening. That's why I like to use this photo and this analogy of just the beach goers just blindly sitting on the beach, but invasive species are happening, infestations are happening all around us, but most people have no idea it's happening because they don't necessarily have like a trained eye. So they see something green and flowering and it's covering up the entire forest and they think, oh, how beautiful. But native species native plants are replaced by non-native invaders, like invasive species, because they take over. So most were brought here on purpose with good intent, but no idea of the risks. And here in their non-native habitat, the invasive species have no natural predators to keep them in check, like wildlife or insects to eat them and keep them at bay. So invasive vines in particular can overwhelm native trees and break them apart and tear them down because they tend to be much heavier than vines like our native grape. And we'll kind of go into a little bit of a case study of that over at Pemberton Park in the coming. Next slide, please. Oh, here it is. Lovely. So why do we care? So this is the problem of invasive species, particularly like the Wisteria to the left and Porcelain Berry to the right take over. They strangle and pull down and girdle trees. Native vegetation gets completely shaded out and dies, which gives invasives even more of a leg up to take over. So one of Wacomico County's greatest concerns at Pemberton Park, where we're doing restoration, was from a safety and liability standpoint, because Wisteria was choking out the native vegetation. It was completely pulling down all of the branches off of the trees, creating what's called widow makers. So those are dead or standing trees that on a windy day have the ability to fall over and endanger the visitors. So a whole 12 acres and growing of Wisteria that we've been working on over at Pemberton. Next slide, please. And why do we care? Again, most invasive species, again, were brought here on purpose with good intent, but no idea of the risks. Like kudzu, it was brought here in the 30s for farmers to mail order and plant as a forage crop, believe it or not. So after it started to spread, the USDA recognized it as a pest weed in the 50s. So once established, they just take over. And I really like this picture just as a visual to see just how they can just blanket landscapes. Next slide, please. Invasive species are a liability to our assets, like our parks, public works facilities, and buildings. Overgrown and unruly invasives can pose as a visibility threat to roadsides and access roads. And again, just from a safety perspective, I used to run a lot at the Salisbury City Park where bamboo was really taken over and covering up some of their facilities. And it's scary. Next slide, please. Invasive species like Japanese and knotweed and Phragmites, they take over banks, creating these sterile environments with absolutely zero native vegetation and therefore zero bank stabilization. So that increases the sediment into our waterways, degrades our water quality, and it's really just a less desirable habitat for our native wildlife. And I know specifically Phragmites can have that effect because they can create flooding in some of our low-lying communities. Next slide, please. And lastly, invasives destroy opportunities for our farmers in our ag and timber industries. So Palmer amaranth to the left is an invasive species that's honestly devastating our agricultural community. I've heard accounts of farmers that have completely abandoned their crop and walked away because Palmer got into it. So it's concerning because it's glyphosate resistant and many other classes of herbicide resistant. Within the timber industry, Callery pear poses the biggest threat. It establishes itself and dominates the understory and can destroy 70 to 100 year forests and stands quickly and effortlessly. Next slide, please. So before we get too ahead of ourselves, I wanted to do some quick defining of terms. There's what is referred to as noxious weeds, and then there's invasive species. So a noxious weed is an annual, biannual, or perennial weed or plant that adversely affects or threatens agricultural production, and it's regulated by the Maryland Weed Control Law. So I took that definition straight from the Maryland Department of Ag's website. So this Maryland Weed Control Law requires landowners to manage noxious weeds on all types of land. So this law is punishable by fines to the landowner. So if any of these species are found on the landowner's property, they have to mitigate, they have to remove them and show proof. Next slide, please. Invasive species is also defined by the Maryland Department of Ag. There's kind of two tiers. There's tier one, which requires, with tier one, again, regulated by the Maryland Department of Ag. And it says that these species cannot be sold commercially. And so those are the species listed that are a part of that tier one currently. And then there's tier two, also regulated by MDA, saying that these species, they can be sold commercially, but they're going to require some additional signage warning the consumer of the effects. Before these species can get categorized as tier one or tier two, MDA asks some major questions like, what are the characteristics? Does it naturalize in Maryland? What is the distribution in Maryland? Does it or could it threaten our endangered species or ecosystems? And how feasible is control? Is it herbicide resistant? You know, how many classes are herbicide resistant? And again, this is what's happening at the state level. It leaves a lot of gaps in terms of management at the local level. So that is why we've created the, next slide, the Lower Eastern Shore Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management, also known as the PRISM. So the PRISM is a network of state, federal, county, and nonprofit groups dedicated to the local and regional management of invasive species in the Lower Shore. So a subcommittee of us met in the early 2020 to designate what we thought the top 10 species to be concerned about here on the Lower Shore. So we're going to do a quick review of these in the next few slides, but by no means are you expected to memorize them at all. However, I do strongly recommend that you take a look at the invasive species toolkit pictured here to the right, just to familiarize yourself with the document. And who knows, you may even find that annoying ground cover that's taken over your yard year after year is actually an invasive species, and you can learn how to manage it properly. But if you open up your phones, I know you have a copy of this PowerPoint as well. I think you can even point it at the screen right now. If you open up your phone camera and just focus it on this QR code, it'll actually take you right to the document itself, or you can just visit it on the link listed below as well. So all of the next slides that I'm going to go over, these are actually pooled, just kind of like a condensed version of information, but it's pooled from this toolkit.
To go on that, we sent you a link to the Lower Shore Land Trust website where this invasive species toolkit's located yesterday.
Thank you, Frank. And I apologize. I also left out, our funding partners here. Obviously, always want to give them credit. Chesapeake Chesapeake Bay Trust and Wacomico County has helped to fund the formation of the PRISM and fund these restoration activities that we're doing within Wacomico County. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, we have the beloved common Reed Phragmites. So this is a common one that you'll potentially see on conservation easement properties that have wetland features. So it's very good at spreading and propagating through all means. So that makes it that much more difficult to manage. Again, detailed information on all of these species can be found in the toolkit, and including like when is the best time to apply X management technique and so forth. So I definitely recommend visiting those. Next slide, please. You can also find a Japanese knotweed along waterways because it does a great job spreading through the water. So we are actually doing restoration at Leonard's Mill Park along their waterway there. They were seeing a tremendous amount of erosion along their waterway, and it was all due to Japanese knotweed that was traveling downstream. So we've been doing some restoration there. Next slide, please. And then this species also prefers to be in moist areas in the floodplains. And you remember, this is also, you maybe remember this from the last slide. This is a tier 1 MDA regulated invasive species, so it can no longer be sold commercially, despite you can go online and purchase it from private retailers, but in the state of Maryland itself, it cannot be sold commercially. So it's particularly dangerous because it emerges earlier than many of the spring natives, so it leaves out before the trees. So it utilizes that sunlight from the open canopy to like spread rapidly. Next slide, please. And there's Wavyleaf Basketgrass. It's a dense ground cover that can be found in forested areas. I should also mention each of these species we've listed. There are also native lookalikes that may be confused. So this is because we do not want to mistake, in this scenario, the native bottlebrush grass for Wavyleaf Basketgrass and go out of our way to remove it or anything like that. So in all of these species, if there are any lookalikes, whether they be native or not, we've also listed them. Next slide, please. The tree of heaven is a doozy because it's a double threat. So not only is the tree invasive, but it is a host plant for another type of invasive species, the spotted lanternfly, pictured here. Next slide, please. The Multiflora Rose forms an impenetrable dense thicket that blankets and kills all native vegetation. Very common, also has these really colorful, easy to spread berries. So, wildlife likes to spread this through seed. Right. And then there's Wisteria, the bane of my existence. We've been doing restoration at Pemberton since 2019 and are finding new pockets every spring. So it's loved by horticulturists or English garden enthusiasts because of its cascading, fragrant purple flowers. But it absolutely wreaks havoc on forests like we discussed earlier. Next slide. Another vine that can be found with Wisteria, but also includes berries, is Porcelain Berry. Last one. And then the third vine to mention is Oriental Bittersweet. So you'll notice on this slide, and I think there's a couple different vines or invasive species, but goats is a way to biologically control this species. So much so that there's a whole business on the Western Shore called Eco Goats that was created to manage this species and others using a herd of traveling goats that love to eat it. So it's very interesting. Next slide, please. And then, I'm sorry, this is actually the last vine that we designated. This is myelominate, and it can create, really long-lasting impacts to our forests and native vegetation. So I know that was a lot of information. But I think the biggest takeaway is that these species of concern spread quickly, and they have noticeable characteristics, and with some practice and, some ground truthing, some, LSLT staff assistance, you'll start to notice when you're out in the field. So when you're out monitoring either with LSLT staff or with other volunteers, just take notes of these species, or, if you're not sure, you can take pictures and send directly to me or other LSLT staff for confirmation. And you'll just want to include it in, and I highlighted it here on the monitoring form, in the significant wildlife and plant species or invasives identified section. This is important information because as much as we love to connect with our landowners and build those relationships and tell them about all the interesting wildlife we may have identified or spotted and how memorable it was, we also want to share resources on how they can continue to be good stewards of their land. So either that be through invasive species control. We have a great list of contractors who we work with on invasive species control, so we can refer them to those contractors. Or, if we found some erosion, there may be some opportunities for funding to combat that erosion. So we like to definitely make those notes in that section possible. So another way to be a part of this initiative is if you're out at a public park and notice any of these species, you can also report it directly by emailing me with a picture. You can, I've tried to think of every way possible that folks can access or get in touch with me. So there's a Google form on our LSLT website. You can also post directly to EdMaps, where we are an administrator on the lower shore, and which is essentially just a crowdsourced invasive species database that you can just post pictures and it gets kind of vetted through their network. So there's a few different ways that you can report these invasive species, but I think that I just think it's really important that we just kind of stay on track. And what it does is it creates this baseline of invasive species and what's out there that we can use to leverage additional funding and for restoration through grants. So it's really important, not only from a landowner perspective, but from just a regional perspective as part of the PRISM efforts. And the last slide here. I just wanted to just say, and lastly, as a homeowner, you can do your part by not buying invasives. So a study was conducted by a UMass graduate of over 1,200 plants identified as an invasive, and that's by a National Park Service definition. 61% were still for sale in the lower 48 states. So I just thought that number was astounding, and I just like to say it as much as I can to get the point across. So some things to look for when you are shopping at maybe some of these larger retail garden centers, or even just smaller garden centers. The sign may say advertise as, it may be advertised as easy to naturalize, vigorous grower, good for erosion control, attracts birds with showy berries. Or there's even these meadows or wildflower mixes that, contain native species, but they may not be native to this region. So just do a little bit of research. And like I said, we always have our invasive species toolkit available as a free resource to you. But if you want to go straight to the source, we also have our native plant sale that you can purchase native plants, and you don't have to worry about potentially buying invasive species. So that's every spring, I think the first week of May, but we'll go into that later.
Thanks, Victoria. I think we do have questions already, or at least one that Christy asked. So how are these things mitigated? And I'm guessing, this is such an issue, but maybe you can touch on that briefly.
Sure. So that's a great question. That's kind of what we're doing with the PRISM. We're really trying to get together partners to be aware of, hey, this is a weed alert. This is something that's moving into the area. That's why we're trying to promote all of these ways to document invasive species. So that way we can know where to start working as funds become available. And that's why we're continuing to do restoration at Pemberton, at Leonard's Mill Park, and recently we were awarded an additional grant by Chesapeake Bay Trust to do restoration at Salisbury City Park. So we'll kick that off this summer. So we're trying to come at it from all of the different perspectives. From a partner standpoint, how can we educate our partners? How can we educate our public works facilities at the county level? We've been hosting trainings with them. And then we try to think about it from an outreach perspective for the public. How can we include them in our work days? We did some great restoration at Cypress Park in Pocomoke with Frank. That was actually his capstone project this past year. And then we also want to think about at our outreach, and then just our restoration component as well. So we have outreach to our different audiences, and then working on outreach and educating some of our contractors on some of the restoration, or best management practices for the restoration.
Victoria, there are a number of different ways to treat them as the different species, and each treatment method is different depending on the species itself. Dealing with a woody vine is going to be much different than a perennial ground cover like wavy or like lesser celandine or something like that. And the guide itself, the toolkit, has sort of the best management practice for the season that you're in for each species. So in some cases that might be an herbicide treatment. In some places that might be hand pulling or utilizing a weed wrench or something like that. Or as Victoria said, you could get a herd of goats from the Western Shore in and eat up your all the invasives that are there. But identifying where they are is one of the best ways to mitigate, coupled with not buying them and putting them on the landscape. And so our neighbor to the east and north, I guess north of us here, Delaware just put a fairly restrictive law in place where most of their invasives are now not able to be sold in the state. Maryland is lagging behind that, but there is a new bill up specifically about woody vines. So that's probably supporting those restrictions on sale of these things is going to be one of the best ways to keep this stuff out of the landscape so we don't have to mitigate for it, as they say about prevention. So that's why the education aspect of this is so important, is to get people to understand that though they're pretty, they're not worth putting on the landscape.
Jared, I have a question.
Go ahead.
I mean, I know mechanically removing some of these invasives is always going to be, the first attempt, but, for larger areas, is there a particular herbicide or product that you recommend is for like targeting one particular species?
So I can speak to that, Billy. We can't, as a PRISM and as invasive species coordinator, we can't particularly recommend any herbicide just because that's not my background and I'm not a professional. But I will say I've worked with some fantastic contractors that that contractor list is up on our website, that just calling around, picking their brains. They're great because they know invasive species. They care about invasive species from a wildlife standpoint. Many of them are hunters and they want to see native vegetation here on the lower shore. So I would recommend going there. And it is true. It's once you get into a larger landscape, and that's what we've discovered at Pemberton. That's why we had to really remove 5 acres of forest because the trees were just dead and it was just spreading so terribly that you don't want to wait till it gets to that point. And when you get to that point, that's when you have to pull in the big guns. That's when you have to do multiple different types of herbicide treatment. You have to do a foliar spray, you have to do basil bark, you have to do Hackett spray, you have to pull out the big guns in addition to I think there was a study that came out, and this was in the grasslands, but it was like something like if it's larger than a 1/4 acre, you need to elevate your management technique to go beyond just hand pulling at that point. You need to get control using either chemical, biological, or some other sort of management technique. So I would recommend in your scenario, definitely reach out to some of our contractors on that list and, give me a call. We can talk through some of them and what your issue may be and who, I might refer to be the best candidate, or a list of some of the best candidates for you to call around to. But I hear you. It's hard.
Yeah.
This is great. I just want to keep us moving and recognize that, we've got 20 minutes left. And we've got some more things to get through. So let's try to save some of the rest of the questions towards the end, because this is a lot of information for folks. It's almost like the fire hose coming at you. And that the idea is to share with you that there are a number of issues related to our stewardship work. So I think Frank's going to share some other information as it comes to soil health.
Thanks, Kate. And again, if anybody has any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me.
All right. So thanks, Victoria. And we're going to go into a little bit about soil health. So there is on our monitoring reports, there's a little section about erosion and soil health that I'll show you at a later date. So soil health is extremely important for our landowners, and to enabling soil health will allow for not only for a better environment, but also increased production for our farmers, as well as for homeowners. That increases bird and bee population, and also reduces the amount of water you need for your plants. There we go. So soil is an ecosystem. So when it comes to soil, plants is not the only thing that we think about that's in there. There's also organic matter, there's bacteria, fungi, there's nematodes, there's protozoa, and all these things are eaten by our insects, mammals like moles and birds, and that just goes to the food chain and it's recycled during decomposition. And the plants absorb it, and we go right through the cycle again. Soils are extremely important. They are habitat for beneficial organisms and microbes. They are required for nutrient recycling, such as nitrogen cycle. They aid in the decomposition of organism and plant matter. They are extremely important for carbon sequestration. They also prevent good soil health prevents erosion, reduces runoff, and reduces pollution. Also, one thing to note is to minimize disturbance of the soil, such as using cover crops on fields. Aggregate stability. So aggregate stability is one of the most important things about soil. So on your left side is a aggregated soil. The water can penetrate very easily through the soil. The water infiltrates. This reduces runoff. It also increases absorption of nutrients into the ground. On the right, we have runoff because of lack of aggregate stability, and that does the opposite of aggregated soil. It increases runoff and eventually pollutes the Chesapeake Bay and other water sources. So this is an example of good and poor soil health. On both these pictures on your left side is extremely good quality soil. You can see that on the left picture, you can see the root structures coming through. There is very, very fine particulates that allows water to go through. There's grasses and stuff on top. And on the right picture, there is a large chunky masses that does not allow water to get through. That causes what's on your right picture. On the left side of that right picture, there is the it looks like a soybean field that water can seep through nicely, and it looks like a beautiful field. You can also tell that they're using no-till practices in this field. On the right side is a photo of a practice that is using tilled fields, and you can see water just standing in the field, which is not very good for soil health or the plant itself, and also reduces yield. So key soil health practices that we see on the Eastern Shore. One is the use of cover crops. This can be cover crops is we can also use crop rotation. So you often see corn, wheat, and rye and barley, soybean, and oilseed radish on the Eastern Shore. Oilseed radish It dies off during the winter. The farmers plant it right after corn usually. Dies off after 3 to 4 freezes, and they can just use a no-till planter and plant right over top. That goes into our next section, which is no-till technology. A lot of the drills and planters nowadays have no-till technology, which is great for soil health. One thing that you can do right behind your house, and these large farmers can do, and small farms and little hobby farms, whatever you want, is test your soils. This is a key ingredient for soil health. These soil tests you can get right at your local
Extension service.
extension service. Thank you, Kate. You can get right at your local extension service, and they send your soil off and give you what's in it. So the 3 ingredients that are most notably is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. They'll explain to you there what that is. Also need to minimize disturbance. So using mulches for farmers, no-till soils, which is great. And a lot of these farmers are using precision agriculture technologies now, which is GPS, which also increases soil health. Be mindful of pollinators. This is extremely important one, especially for our homeowners. Don't mow your meadows. Wait as long as possible. That increases soil health, preserves pollinator habitat, and the insects often lay eggs and use other side of leaves and stalks, which is extremely important. Only use chemicals when extremely necessary. If you have to use chemicals, wait till dusk or early dawn. That way pollinators are less active. Plant native plants. This is extremely important for our gardens. And use pollinator meadows and pollinator strips. Some farmers are actually putting little pollinator strips inside of ditches now, which is really cool. So this is an example of a little soil health flyer that I'm handing out during our little initial letters to our landowners. In our little bag, I'll give you some of these as well if you need to, and as a resource. And you guys also got this in an email yesterday. We'll skip questions for soil health for now. We're going to go right into remote monitoring. So we're going to learn what is remote monitoring, why is remote monitoring useful, and I'll learn some of the basic tools of LENS. LENS is the software that we're using for this remote monitoring. It's a really, really cool tool that we use for seeing aerial images. So remote monitoring uses LENS. This is an example of LENS. Uses satellite imagery to monitor properties. Some of the pros are we can see the entire property. We can see buffers clearly. We can see just outside the property, so we can look for encroachment issues that could possibly go on. Some of the cons are sometimes our shape files are not quite accurate, and we have to go in and edit them, or just make sure we're right mark. It does kind of reduce the landowner relations, so we have to be strategic about this, and try to keep our relations with our landowners. And we don't, because we're using this program, we're less, we need volunteers less. However, when we're trying, if you guys are interested this year, if you want to learn how to do this, it'd be kind of cool. So this is an example of some of the things that we're looking at. So on the left picture is a property that's over 1,000 acres. On the very right is a property that's 8 acres. So you can kind of tell if you look in the left image, we're not going to be able to get through all that property in one day. So looking at the aerial imagery, we can get through that pretty quickly, look for anything going on, any new structures, any forest stuff, anything that's being forested. On the right, however, we can get on the ground that pretty easy. but it's also nice to see any changes during the year. So this is a really cool point about aerial monitoring. We can actually see land loss in real time. So because of the sea level rise and slow subsidence, we can tell that we're losing land. On the left side, there's a couple of pictures. On the top is a survey from 1969 of this property. And you can tell if you look in the bottom from the 2021 image that we're losing a ton of land. I estimated around 102 acres were lost just in 60 years. Yeah, 70 years. So that's a ton of land. So this is an example of what we're looking for. This is a roughly 300 acre area. So one thing we're looking for is any disturbances in the forest, and you can tell in the right central section of the forest, there's a little bald spot there. So if we zoom in, we can tell that on a lens, when you're zooming in real close, you can see that there is a possible couple like campers or something. This is something we look at and say, hey, we need to go on the ground and get some images of what's going on, which we did, and we found out it was just a little hunting camp, which is no big deal. So one other thing we can look at is vegetative buffers. And this is a good example of an issue where we have a reduction of vegetative. So on the bottom right side, you can see a little graph. And this graph shows a period of 4 years, 4.5 years of how much the decrease of vegetative buffer in this little yellow square or yellow rectangle. And you can tell it's actually can be very significant. And we can use this tool to see exactly what's going on in these little small pockets. And also one other thing is when we're out monitoring, some of these properties going to have little crypt pieces right in the middle of the property. These properties are on the 2 separate reports. So doing on aerial monitoring, we can get both these reports knocked out at the same time, which is kind of cool as well. And this is a really cool tool of a lot of the new GIS programs can do this, and Lens lets you slide back and forth and compare different dates. So this is 2018 on the left and 2021 on the right. This is a good example of what a timbered area looks like. On the left, it's all green and lush. On the right, and you see it's a clear cut. And this slide bar can show us exactly where it is, and if we can also see if there's a new house or there's a new little camper or something, which is kind of cool. And questions to the last 2 sections.
Frank, that was really great. There's a lot of information that's available to our volunteers. We have done 3-ring binders in the past where some of our volunteers go ahead and add information that is presented. So it's a pretty good way to build your own kind of environmental and conservation literacy. And some of our volunteers have chosen to do an electronic manual, so we can send you information and resources as we update those. As we're going forward and you have some other questions. Oh, Kathleen asks, if you have a lot of moles in your yard, does that indicate good soil health?
I don't know that
Yeah.
presence or absence of moles shows anything about the actual health of the soil, but at least there's something in there for them to eat if they're there.
Well, they're probably an indicator of there's a lot of earthworms in there, so it could be pretty good soil. Yeah,
That's great. Good question. So Frank, next slide. While we're looking at some of the other ways to get involved, I do want to thank our current volunteers, but I also want to recognize a couple people that are on the phone on this call right now. Jen Merritt is a recent addition to our staff. She's our program and development coordinator. And Catherine Culbertson is our education and outreach coordinator with the AmeriCorps program. So we're really excited. Our team is just so strong at the Land Trust, but we can't do it without the support of volunteers. Whether you choose to get involved as a land steward, which is, I think you can see is a vital role for our organization, there are other ways to get involved. And we always need volunteers at events, whether it's somebody else's event, one of our partners, big festivals that we believe we'll get back to one day. So we need folks to help us at those events. Catherine's coordinating docents for our Sturgis Park Garden. So next door to the Land Trust is a wonderful pollinator garden. And we're looking for regular upkeep there, especially since the Black-Eyed Susan is the paddle boat going down the Pocomoke. And we get lots of people to get on that and enjoy a scenic ride. And but they go right by our office and they go right by the garden. And it's a great opportunity to educate folks about the work that we do. We always need help at the holiday time with our green sale and wreath making. So great opportunities to get involved, and a couple of upcoming Land Trust events that we need help with is our native plant sale. And if Victoria didn't encourage you enough to go native, hopefully this will. And we had our inaugural pollinator garden tour last year that's coming back by popular demand, and we're so excited for this year. And then our annual flannel formal fundraiser is another way. Our fundraisers are so important to raise unrestricted funds for the organization. Next slide.
Okay, we have a question in the chat about sharing the presentation with friends to pique their interest. Would that be available?
Yeah, it's being sent out. If you didn't receive it already, Christy, you're welcome to share this PowerPoint PDF with your friends. Absolutely. So this is a series that we have coming up in the region. It's a strategic partnership with the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy to strengthen bird conservation on the Delmarva Peninsula. So several land trust and conservation partners work throughout the Delmarva Peninsula to address a variety of different species and ecosystems. So unfortunately, habitat loss from a variety of reasons like sea level rise and development, along with large scale changes in farming practices have contributed to the decline of a lot of bird species. So the idea about this series is to bring attention to some of those challenges and some of the opportunities that we have, and to really engage volunteers and land stewards. So you all are getting the first crack at being able to attend this series. The Pickering Creek Audubon Center is coming up quickly. That's going to be an opportunity to see what those folks out at the Audubon Center have done for restoration, and to learn about a citizen science approach where you can use an app on your phone to identify what you see out in the field. We're also going to see what the Chino Farms is doing in terms of habitat restoration with Washington College and the Natural Lands Project. We have an exciting bird banding opportunity with Foreman's Branch Bird Observatory. Those are mostly on the mid and upper shore. So there's going to be traveling involved, but these programs are going to be just really dynamic, and hope that you take advantage of them. The series will go through July, and look forward. They're very limited in attendance. So if you are interested and want to find more, please let us know and we'll make sure you get additional information. The links to register will be coming up soon. And next slide. There you go, Frank.
All right, so in the email yesterday, we got a little sign up sheet for our ground training dates, which are Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, February 17th, 18th, and 19th, 10 a.m. to about 2 p.m. We are providing lunch if you would like for those 3 days. And after that, we have monitoring set up on February 23rd, 24th, March 1, 2, 3, and 5. I'll be sending out an email probably early to mid next week and for you guys to sign up for. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Also, right about 11 a.m., a survey is going to be going out to you guys. So for this training, if it hasn't already.
And everybody that would like to actually be a land steward with us, we'd encourage you to do one of those 3 ground training dates if you are available to do one of them. If not, let us know and we can arrange another date. Maybe couple it with one of these other early February or early March monitoring dates. But we do a little bit more in-depth talking through what we're doing at those ground training dates than we will at the actual monitoring dates. But if we need to adjust that a little bit, we can to work with y'all's schedules. So please fill out the survey and let us know which days you'd be available for the training.
Yep, and I'll work with you guys as much as I can to try to get you guys out there and have some fun.
Well, if there's not any other questions, I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your weekend to learn more about the work that we do and opportunities to get involved in the organization. And I want to thank Frank and Jared and Victoria for sharing their time and expertise with all of us so we can learn more about what the Lower Shore Land Trust is doing to conserve important lands across the Lower Shore and beyond. So thanks so much, you guys, and hope to see you soon. Catherine, Layton, if you can't make those training dates, we will help you in any way we can. We can get you out with another training program. And I also want to mention that Catherine's got her family is involved with the pollinator garden at Ben's Red Swings. They had a great vision to do that. So there's always looking for volunteers. And we try to get out there at least once a year to help clean up that really lovely memorial site. Anything else? All right, well, it's the weekend. Thank you all so much.